This morning we're going to talk a little bit about converting grant or BIE operated schools to tribally controlled grant schools. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the policies and procedures that are involved in actually transitioning the schools from BIE operated to grant schools. As you may have heard, the Congress has declared its policy on Indian self-determination. And if you look back in history, back in 1975, Congress enacted the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act, which was a movement towards self-determination. And it also was a step towards allowing tribes to have control over the programs that were being provided by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And as a result, have actually indicated that they are obligated to assure maximum Indian participation in the direction of educational services so as to render the persons administering such services more responsive to the needs and desires of Indian communities. So this is actually a policy statement that is contained in 93638, 100-297, as amended by the No Child Left Behind Act, Public Law 107-110. The Congress has declared its commitment to the maintenance of the federal government's unique and continuing trust relationship. And education became a trust obligation with the authorization of Public Law 100-297. And that was enacted back in 1988 and continues today, and this commitment is also contained in Public Law 107-110, the No Child Left Behind Act. So the trust relationship for education is a commitment by the Congress of the United States. It is also the Congress position that true self-determination in any society of people is dependent upon an educational process that will ensure the development of qualified people to fulfill meaningful leadership roles. And as a part of our educational system, the Congress and I believe the Bureau of Indian Education is committed to ensuring that our education system produces qualified people to fulfill these meaningful leadership roles within our Indian tribes. They also understand that Indian people do have special and unique educational needs, different from mainstream. And as a result, there is now a focus on culture and language to be incorporated into the curriculums of the tribally controlled schools and BIE schools. BIE also recognizes that and supports that to be incorporated. And the Congress back in 1988 also believed that these needs, the educational needs, may best be met through a grant process. And therefore, they enacted Public Law 100-297. And as you may know, up to this point in time, approximately 2/3 of our 187 schools and dormitories are now tribally controlled. And the director of the Bureau of Indian Education at this point is focused on self-determination and allowing tribes to operate, control, and determine for the tribe's students the direction they should be going in terms of education. So as a result, the director will facilitate the efforts of Indian tribes and tribal organizations to plan, conduct, and administer education programs, functions, services, and activities which the BIE is now authorized to administer for the benefit of Indian students. The director will also make best efforts to remove any obstacles that might hinder Indian tribes and tribal organizations that hinder tribal autonomy and flexibility in the administration of such programs. So there is a focus, and I believe the study group also provided some recommendations in terms of self-determination and Indian control of their education programs. So the director is focused to move in that direction. The director shall encourage tribes and tribal organizations to become increasingly knowledgeable about the BIE's programs administered by the BIE. And as a result, we're doing the WebExes, and I foresee in the future additional meetings, trainings to be provided to tribes to become more knowledgeable about what BIE programs that the BIE is administering on behalf of Indian tribes. And this not only includes interior education programs, but also Department of Ed programs such as Title I, Special Ed Part B, etc. And there's many programs Department of Ed provides to Indian or tribally controlled schools and BIE schools. The director supports the tribe's capacity to manage and operate tribally controlled schools. And this includes supporting the development of a school reform plan. The report that came out of the study group essentially states that the BIE has not done a very good job of educating Indian students, and that this focus to allow tribes to control their schools and their curriculums is going to improve the academic achievement of Indian students attending BIE-funded schools. The BIE will continue to serve as technical assistance providers to tribes to assist them to ensure that the students are successful academically. The director will continue to discharge the education trust responsibilities of the Congress. As a result, the focus on self-determination and the movement will continue. The director recognizes that the tribal decision to grant education programs are strictly voluntary, and this is specifically stated in the law that to convert a BIE-operated school to a tribally controlled school is strictly voluntary by that governing body. So if a tribe decides that they do want to operate that school locally with community input, they can do so, and they're authorized by law to do that. But again, it is strictly voluntary. And in fact, the director recognizes that tribal decisions to grant or not to grant are equal expressions of self-determination. The tribe, if they wish to do so, can operate the school. But on the other hand, if they choose for the BIE to continue operating the school, both are expressions of self-determination. And it's the director's intent to support and assist Indian tribes in the development of strong and stable tribal educational programs capable of administering quality programs. As a result of this focus, the BIE provided an opportunity for tribes to compete for grants, to build capacity, and develop plans to move towards granting the BIE operated schools, or perhaps combining schools into one grant that would essentially be operated as a school district for the tribes with multiple schools. Once the director receives a request, a written notice of a tribe's intention to grant a school, planning by the director staff begins immediately. And the Bureau has a lot of obligations if a tribe requests to convert a school. There's reductions in force that will have to happen, because if a BIE school converts to a tribally controlled school, all staff, federal staff, will be reduced in force. The Bureau does, in agreement with the bargaining unit that represents educators, will request tribes to maintain as many of the staff that are going to be adversely impacted or reduced in force when the school is converted. So there is a lot of responsibility that the director must carry out during the time of the request and up to the point of actually converting the school. The director shall make available to Indian tribes and tribal organizations all education functions that may be lawfully granted under the Act. Now, every educational program that is provided to a BIE-operated school will be made available to the tribe for the operation of the tribally controlled school. All of these funds flow from the Department of Education through the Department of Interior and then on to the tribes. There is one exception, and that is Title VII, supplemental education dollars. When a school converts to a tribally controlled school, they will deal directly with the Department of Education on Title VII. The Department of Education provides those funds directly to the school, the tribally controlled school, and those dollars then do not flow through the Department of Interior. They flow directly to the schools. The Director's commitment to Indian self-determination requires that these policies be liberally construed for the benefit of Indian tribes and tribal organizations to effectuate the strong federal policy of self-determination. So if there's conflict or differing views of policies within the Bureau between a tribe and the federal government, those policies will be construed for the benefit of Indian tribes. That not only holds true for policies, but in the event there is conflicting interpretations of statutes, those will be construed for the benefit of Indian tribes and tribal organizations as well. Except as specifically provided in the Act, an Indian tribe or tribal organization is not required to abide by any unpublished requirements, such as program guidelines, manuals, or policy directives. Now, there has been a multitude of issues that have arisen based on this particular policy. And quite frankly, tribally controlled schools are required to adhere to statutory requirements, regulatory requirements, and requirements contained in OMB circulars. However, they do not have to abide by policy or general guidelines provided by the Bureau of Indian Education. There is nothing that prevents them from adopting those policies, such as the child abuse reporting requirements, the policy. Some grant schools have adopted those in whole in order to provide reports on child abuse. So in terms of policy, tribally controlled schools can adopt those if they desire to do so, but on the other hand are required to adhere to statutes, regulatory, and OMB requirements. As a part of the 100-297 grant system, the tribes are eligible to receive administrative costs. And these are costs that a tribe or tribal organization incurs as a result of operating a tribal elementary or secondary program. They are not customarily paid by comparable Bureau-operated programs out of direct program funds, and are either normally provided for comparable Bureau programs or are otherwise required of tribal self-determination program operators. Now, for BIE-operated schools, all of the administrative functions are paid for either by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, for example, for acquisitions, for property, for budget, for finance. All of these are paid for by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. At the local level at BIE operated schools, the administrative activity is paid by ISEP for business managers, for personnel technicians, and for principals. That portion of their responsibility dealing with administrative issues. All of these are paid for by the Bureau of Indian Affairs or the Bureau of Indian Education. When you become a tribally controlled school, in order to carry out these necessary administrative functions, all tribally controlled schools are provided administrative cost grant funds to perform these services. There is a formula that has been established and is used to determine the administrative cost rate that a tribe or tribal organization is eligible for. These rates then are applied to the current year's funds to determine the dollar amounts that a tribe or tribal organization will receive for their administrative functions. And these administrative functions include an accounting system, HR policies and procedures, a property management system, risk management system, attorney fees, and all of the other activities associated with necessary administrative functions. But those are just a few examples of what types of activities can be funded by administrative costs. So essentially, the Congress and the director are focused and are moving in the direction of Indian self-determination when it comes to operating schools and educating Indian students, and that there in fact is a trust responsibility by the Congress as enacted in law to provide an education for Indian students. Now, the following is going to provide for you the steps in actually converting a BIE operated school to a tribally controlled school. So the very first thing that happens is either the tribe or tribal organization will submit a letter of intent to BIE operated school to a tribally controlled school. And the letter of intent is to be sent to the education line officer, who is also identified as the grants officer. So the letter of intent is the very first step that happens in the conversion process. Now, once the grants officer receives the letter of intent, within 5 days after receiving the intent, will notify the tribe or tribal organization in writing that the intent to convert has been received. We have received your letter. Within 10 days, the ELO provides an application and specific instructions on completing the application, and also provides the requirement of a tribal governing body resolution for the conversion. The statute requires this formal action by the governing body to move forward with the conversion. Also, the ELO will provide technical assistance as necessary to have the tribe or tribal organization complete the application and the tribal governing body resolutions. If there is a need by the tribal organization or the tribe requiring assistance from the Bureau of Indian Education, the grants officer, ELO, should be providing this assistance to the tribe or tribal organization to ensure that everything is in place to be submitted to convert the school.
Hi, David. It looks like we have a question from Matthew.
Sure.
Yeah.
Matt, I'm not sure how this works, so.
Yeah, me too.
He asked, what is considered disallowed use of administrative cost grants?
There has been a court decision regarding use of administrative cost grant funds. BASI, Shiprock Alternative Schools Incorporated, conducted an audit of their operations. And as a part of the audit findings, it was determined that the school expended funds for administrative purposes above and beyond what they had received from the Bureau of Indian Education for their administrative cost grant. The problem and the issue with administrative cost grants within the Bureau of Indian Education is that the BIE has not received 100% of the funds that they need to fund grant schools at 100%. So right now, we fund grant schools at approximately 62% of what the formula says they should be receiving. So what happened in the SASE court case is that the judge determined that the formula that the BIE uses to determine the administrative cost rate and then eventually administrative cost grant dollars at one level. But the BIE only funds at 62%. So say, for example, if SASE's dollar amount based on the formula is determined to be $100,000, the BIE currently provides $62,000 only because that is the only funds that we have to put out for administrative cost grant. So the court decision said the tribally controlled schools should be eligible to make up that difference between $62,000, the actual amount they receive, and $100,000, which is the amount that the formula says that they're entitled to. They can use other program dollars to make up that difference between the $62,000 and $100,000. So they can use ISEP, they can use Title I, they can use Title IID, they can use Part B, special ed money, to make up that difference between what they actually receive and what the formula says they should be receiving. Now, any expenditures above and beyond $100,000 will become question cost and could later become disallowed cost. Now, to make up the difference between the $62,000 and $100,000, that amount from each program needs to be reasonable and not otherwise prohibited by law. So, and there are some general guidelines that are provided by the Department of Ed on percentages that can be applied to for administrative purposes. So, only in the case where you spend above and beyond what the formula says you're entitled to will the issue of question cause arise, and it could become disallowed cost. And also they will be looking at the amount of dollars that are taken from each of the federal programs then to make up that difference, as long as it's fair and reasonable and not otherwise prohibited by law, then those should be allowable.
So can a school take special education money to cover the short?
Can they use special education money?
Yes.
They can use a portion of it. Now, the general guideline on reasonableness, I believe, is around 5%.
He was denied because he didn't submit his transcripts?
So the EPA currently, I believe, sets aside about 5% of the funds for administrative purposes. And those are general guidelines that are put out there by the Department of Ed. So as long as you work within the confines of the Department of Ed requirements, that should be fine.
Would this be his admission letter?
Okay. Okay. Now, in the application, the actual application that's going to be filled out by the tribal organization or the tribe is you need to identify the type of school that you're requesting to convert, whether it's a BIE operated school or non-BIE funded school. Now, the law actually speaks to two types of schools.
I sent oh shoot.
One that is operated by the Bureau, or a school that a tribe or tribal organization wants to authorize under 100-297. Now, these types of schools do not happen very often, and in fact, I've not seen non-BIE funded school being authorized tribally controlled school. But BIE operated schools are obviously eligible for conversion to a tribally controlled school. And in the application, you're going to be required to submit the name of the organization or the tribe, address and phone number, and the tribe that is authorizing this application. You're going to provide in the application the name of the tribe or tribal organization to benefit from this application. And then your tribal document, your resolution. We're eventually going to need a copy of the authorizing resolution to convert the school. You're going to need to provide a description of the academic standards that the tribe or tribal organization is going to utilize. You're going to include a program narrative statement, a program plan on how you are going to provide an education program for those students that will be attending the school. You're also going to need to provide information on the type of equipment that you're going to be requiring, your bookkeeping and accounting procedures, financial policies and procedures, and an accounting system. You're going to provide information on your knowledge of operating the school. And the law says substantive knowledge of operating the school. And this would be more likely from the school board perspective if they are the grantee. Or if the tribe is the grantee, then that will need to be provided probably from a tribal Department of Education who may be overseeing these tribally controlled schools. We're going to need to, you're going to need to show how you plan to provide adequately trained personnel, teachers, school administrators, administrative types, accounting personnel, HR personnel, and those kinds, the kinds of activities that you're going to be providing under the grant. And then it also asks for any other components in the operation of the school. You're going to be looking at HR manual, a financial policies and procedures manual, risk management system, property management system. Now, as I indicated earlier, the Bureau of Indian Education is obligated to provide assistance to the tribes or tribal organizations that are requested to convert to ensure that these systems are in place, developed, and ready for implementation on July 1 of the year of the conversion. Upon receipt of a notice to convert, the grants officer shall within 5 days notify the tribe that they have in fact received it. Within 10 days provide an application and instructions and provide technical assistance. Within 30 days of receipt of the completed application and authorizing resolution, it shall be reviewed and recommend approval or disapproval to the Director BIE. And again, the office that will be doing the review and the recommending will be the Education Line Officer or the Grants Officer, who reviews all of the documents and then provides a recommendation to the Director for approval or disapproval. A copy of the recommendation for approval shall also be provided to the HR Director. Now, we are required by the bargaining unit agreement to notify the bargaining unit of the impending conversion to a tribally controlled school. And that's because, as I've indicated earlier, all Bureau personnel that were employed at that school to be converted will be displaced as federal employees.
Hi, David. It looks like we have another question from Derek.
Absolutely.
He's asking, many times DODE explains this process to the grantees. The grantees basically rely on the building principals, understand, and comprehend this process. What is the BIE position regarding this?
The grants officer really should be knowledgeable about the displacement process, and if necessary, to bring in staff from the Human Services or Human Resources Office to provide that information to the staff. Now, if a school is going to be converted, what happens is staff members from the HR office will make personal visits out to the school, sit down with each employee to go over whether they're going to be receiving severance pay if they're not eligible for retirement, or if they're within 5 years of retirement, they'll be also counseled by the HR staff. But for general purposes of presentation, it really should be the grants officer who should be providing this information. And, you know, again, if they need to get HR staff they need them for assistance, they can work through the director of HR to get those people out to help explain that. This is a huge issue when it comes to conversions. And, you know, we need to do all we can to make sure that staff folks understand exactly, you know, how they're going to be impacted in this conversion. And thank you for that question. I hope that clarifies it, Derek.
I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you.
Okay.
Okay. Tribal control school grants shall be effective the school year following the fiscal year the application and authorizing resolutions are received. So basically, we've got 3 schools currently that the BIE is working with to convert on July 1, 2015. So in order for the effective date to become July 1, 2015, they had to submit the application in FY14. So FY14, they submitted the application and authorizing resolution. So their effective date would be the school year succeeding the FY14. And these schools will be converting on July 1, 2015. If the application and authorizing resolution is acceptable, the grants officer provides recommendation for approval to the director BIE. According to the statute, the director has 120 days to approve or decline the request to convert. A copy of the recommendation for approval shall also be provided to the HR director, who shall notify the bargaining unit. Tribally controlled school grants are effective the school year following the fiscal year the application and resolution was received. Now, if the application and the resolution come in and they are not acceptable by the BIE, then the BIE must provide technical assistance to the tribe or tribal organization until the application and authorizing resolution are acceptable. And the whole intent and purpose of this technical assistance is to ensure that tribes are successful in leading up to and eventually in operating these schools and providing a quality education for Indian students. It's the BIE's responsibility to help ensure the success of these schools. Within 30 days of receipt of the revised application, now, if the director determines that the application is not acceptable at this time, the tribe or tribal organization is to be provided an additional 60 days to work on the application with the help of the BIE to have it acceptable. Within 30 days of receipt of the revised application, an authorizing governing body resolution, the grants officer will review and recommend approval to the director BIE. So, in fact, all of the applications and the authorizing resolutions being submitted by tribes or the tribal organizations, the BIE will ensure that everything is acceptable to allow the school to convert from BIE operated to tribally controlled school. And it's BIE's responsibility to ensure that that happens.
Hi, David. It looks like we have two more questions. One
Okay.
from Matthew and one from Derek. And I'm not sure, would you guys like to ask your questions now?
Sure.
Sure, I can do that. Do you want to go first, Matt, or me?
Okay, well, my question is, one of the biggest concerns, and this has come up, is going to always be about money. In this case, is there a method or a way to accurately estimate how much money will be allocated in terms of like startup money, like administrative costs, grant, Title I, ISEP, special education, transportation, etc., to convert, let's say, 1, 2, 3, 4 existing BIE schools into one grant school? And second, that this is going back to another one of the commonly asked questions, is there a method of how we can estimate how much it will cost to compensate existing federal employees at the current compensation levels if the conversion were to happen? I mean, are there ways to calculate what the federal pay system is, the benefits, and so on?
That's a great question.
It's going to come up repeatedly, so it's...
Sure. There are... Let me back up to answer your first question first. We can actually, if you identify multiple schools that you want to put into one grant, we can actually take their program dollars and run the administrative cost grant formula for those schools and determine a rate, and then do an estimated amount based on what we think that they're going to receive in the upcoming school year. We can do that. Now, there is a huge difference between if the tribe or the tribal organization is the grantee. Right now, the formula is being run where if the tribe is the grantee, then what they include in the direct cost base that is used in the formula is to include not only the educational program dollars, but to include all non-construction, non-social service 638 contracts as a part of that direct cost base. The concept of the formula is the bigger the direct cost base, the smaller your administrative cost rate percent is going to be. So if you have 5 schools, for example, under one grant, and if the tribe is the grantee, then the direct cost base will be larger. Your administrative cost rate will be smaller. If one school, or take those same 5 schools, but if, say, Doty is the grantee, and because you don't have to include all of the 638 contracts in it, your administrative cost rate will be a little bit higher. As a result, your administrative cost grant dollars will be a little bit higher. And so that's the difference between a tribal organization and a tribe being the grantee for these grant schools.
Okay, I got a question to, David. With the tribe as the grantee, in regards to the administrative cost,
Mm-hmm.
the way the formula is determined and the amount the money is given for administrative costs, is that protected by law?
The formula?
Yes, and
The formula itself is actually in statute.
okay. Now,
So unless the Congress revises the formula in the statute, that's what we use to calculate the administrative cost grant. That's the formula. Okay, so if it's going to be changed, then it has to be done so by the Congress.
okay, what about the funds? Is that, once the funds are determined, the amount of money, is that also protected by law?
The funds are put out to the tribes based on what Congress appropriates for the line item called, and it's actually now called Tribal Grant Support Costs. And it's an actual line item in Indian Affairs budget. And whatever amount is funded in that line item is the amount of dollars that is put out by the Bureau of Indian Education. None of that money is held back for BIE management. It's all for the purpose of funding administrative cost grants for tribally controlled schools. There may be a portion that may be used to transition schools from BIE operated to tribally controlled schools. Or they may use management funds to also fund the conversions.
Is there a set price? Is there a set line item for each, I guess for each line item, is there a set amount?
There is an amount that's being proposed, for example, in FY16 budget or 17 budget, I guess they're working on now, I'm not sure, but it's all proposed by the BIE to the Assistant Secretary, and then the Assistant Secretary to the Secretary of the Interior in terms of how much money is asked for in each of those line items. Now, before I forget, let me go back and answer Matt's other question of salaries and benefits, etc. When there are a number of provisions out of Public Law 93638 that applies to 100-297 grants. One of them is the tribe or tribal organization to maintain the pay, the federal pay, and federal benefits of these employees if they are picked up in the grant school. So a grantee can actually pay the same level of pay or provide the same level of pay if they pick them up in the school. And then they can also provide and buy the same benefits if they're picked up by the grant school. So there's a provision in 638 that allows 638 contractors to do this. That provision applies to tribally controlled grant schools. But it's a decision that's made by the grantee, either the tribe or the tribal organization. Okay, does that answer your questions?
Yes, it does. Is there a way to sort of get a ballpark figure of what the existing compensation rates for well, let's say, some of the schools on a school-by-school basis, just to get an idea about what that compensation looks like, what the cost will be, if that is the case?
You should be able to get copies of budgets from the local school boards. And remember that these BIE school boards, even though they're school boards for the BIE school, they're tribal organizations. And so the Navajo Nation should be able to work with the school boards to get copies of those budgets. And if not from the school boards, then perhaps from the principals.
David, in addition to Matt's question, what happens if they won't give it to the tribe? Sometimes our boards they refuse to give us that information.
For the Navajo Nation, as efficient and effective as it is, the committee that oversees all of the schools on Navajo now, do they oversee the Bureau schools as well, or just the grant schools?
Just the grant school.
The committee that approves those grants.
Just the grant school and the one contract school.
Okay. I would think that we could be able to work with the director or with the ELO to get copies of those budgets. I mean, I don't understand why you're not able to get copies of those. I would not tell the tribe how to go about doing this because, I mean, I think that, you know, the tribe really needs to make that determination. But just keep in mind that these school boards are organizations of the tribe, and they're not bureau organizations. They're not federal. They're tribal. And apologize, I don't have a good answer for you, I guess, on that one. Okay. The director has 120 days after receipt of the application to determine whether, in the case of a school that is not being operated by the tribe or tribal organization, whether it's transfer operation of the school or whether the school is eligible for assistance under the Act. So essentially the director has 120 days to say yes or no, we're going to convert the school. Once we receive the application and the resolution, the 120 days starts upon the receipt of both of those. Can the statutory 120-day period be extended? Nothing in law allows the 120-day period to be extended. However, the director can also approve the request to grant earlier than the 120 days. And in some cases, we've done that turnaround pretty quickly, within 30 days. Sometimes it takes, a while. But the director actually has 120 days to do this. What happens if the director does not make a determination within the 120 days? Well, the director shall be treated as having made a determination that the tribally controlled school is eligible for assistance under the Act, and the grant shall be effective the school year succeeding the FY the application and resolution were received. Okay?
Hi, David. Mario Molina had a follow-up question that he would like to ask.
Absolutely.
Hello, David. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't sure if the one went through. It was a follow-up question, too. If a tribe converts and they decide not to retain those former federal employees, is there an amount of time that has to go by? Say, for instance, a John Smith leaves for 1 year, 2 years, and comes back to that same school. Does the tribe have to honor that salary of the former?
Okay, let me see if I understood what, I heard the question right. If a grant school decides to accept the salary, the federal salary and the benefits, and they leave and then they come back, do you have to honor that salary and fringe benefits?
Correct.
Is that the question?
Yes.
Okay, no. Now, you can determine what the grantee is going to pay. If somebody leaves federal service, they come to a grant school and you allow, you're authorizing them to be paid at the federal rate. They leave, they come back, you are not committed to that. You can, at some point, you may want to think about developing your own salary schedule and determining your own fringe benefits to pay these employees working for the grant school. But no, nothing in law obligates you to continue paying federal salary and federal benefits if they leave your school and then come back. Nothing requires that.
Thank you.
Okay. What happens if the director denies an application? The director shall state the objection in writing to the tribe or tribal organization within 30 days. He shall provide technical assistance to the tribe or tribal organization to overcome all stated objections at the request of the tribe or tribal organization. Provide the tribe or tribal organization a hearing on the record under the same rules and regulations that apply under the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act, and provide an opportunity to appeal the objections raised by the director. But that's only if the director denies an application to convert to a tribally controlled school. Essentially, the same rules that applies to 638 contracts applies to 100 and 297 grants. Here's some information on how to maintain the grant once you get it converted, once you convert a school to a tribal controlled grant school. Requirements to maintain their eligibility for assistance as a grantee. And there's two reasons that the Secretary of Interior can revoke a determination that the school is eligible. One, the Indian tribe or tribal organization must submit the required report as stated in Public Law 107-110, which amends 100-297. As long as you continue to submit the annual reports, the Secretary cannot revoke your determination for eligibility. And these reports are due 90 days after the end of the fiscal year. If your fiscal year ends June 30th, then these annual reports are due September 30th. As long as the school is certified or accredited by a state or regional accrediting association, or is a candidate in good standing, the secretary cannot revoke your eligibility. So those two things, as long as the grantee meets those, you're eligible to maintain, continue to maintain the grant. Okay, so what reports are required? The 100-297 as amended requires these documents to be submitted as a part of the annual report on the grants. And the grantees must submit an annual financial statement reporting revenue and expenditures as defined by the cost accounting established by the grantee. An annual financial audit conducted pursuant to the standards of the Single Audit Act of 1984. A biannual compliance audit of the procurement of personal property. During the period for which the report is being prepared, that shall be in compliance with written procurement standards that are developed by the local school board. Now, as I indicated earlier, one of the requirements as a part of the application is the Financial Policies and Procedures Manual and an accounting system. So these written procurement standards become a part of your financial policies and procedures. An annual submission to the Secretary of the number of students served and a brief description of programs offered under the grant. And E, a program evaluation conducted by an impartial evaluation review team to be based on the standards established. Now, if the school is already accredited, then you do not have to conduct a program evaluation by an impartial review team. What you do is you utilize the certificate for accreditation as a part of the annual report, and when the time interval period comes for the actual review, then you would use the evaluation report by the accrediting agency for E, which is a program evaluation. Long as you're accredited, you can use a certificate, and then at the point in time when the reviews are conducted, then you can use that report as a part of the annual report that's required under the Act. Where do the reports go? One, they initially, they first go to the tribal governing body. Now, this is actual language from the statute. It says, upon completion of the report, the recipient of the grant shall send via first-class mail return receipt requested a copy of such annual report to the tribal governing body of the tribally controlled school. Not later than 30 days after receiving written confirmation that the tribal governing body has received the report, the recipient then shall send a copy of the report to the Secretary. Now, again, the ELO or the grants officer represents the Secretary in this 100-297 grant program. So the reports will be sent to the line officer or the grants officer. Now, this is something that really is important, and that is monitoring requirements. Now, as I indicated before, there are several provisions of 93638 that applies to 10297 grants. And this is another one. Relating to records and monitoring, and that's section 108C. Responsibilities of the contractor. With respect to the monitoring activities of the secretary, the routine monitoring visits shall be limited to not more than one performance monitoring visit for this contract, unless there is a situation that deals with finances or other program non-compliance issues that may require more than one monitoring visit. But in general, all of these grants should be monitored at least one time annually by the Bureau of Indian Education. And Appendix A, and we'll send this this PowerPoint out to everyone. So Appendix A essentially puts in step-by-step process the actual request to convert and the steps it takes to actually convert a BIE operated school to a tribally controlled school. So we'll make sure that we get this PowerPoint, and you can go through the step-by-step process in how the conversion process works. And it just actually summarizes what we've gone through in the PowerPoints up above. It also talks a little bit about what the BIE has to do in terms of closing out a BIE operated school. Now, are there any other general questions or just questions in general that anyone would like to ask? This pretty much concludes the PowerPoint presentation. Any other questions?
It looks like Mario has a question. Mario, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was trying to type it because I'm not feeling too well. But has there been any tribes, David, that have gone through this process?
All right.
Gone through this process to
convert.
We're actually working with 2 tribes right now to convert the 3 schools. But in terms of multiple schools under one grant, I haven't done one like that in a while.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a process to, let's say, well, this is with existing grant schools or tribal organizations. Can the tribe merge tribal organizations into one tribal organization?
You mean into one grant?
Yes, like existing grant schools or tribal organizations. Is there a mechanism or process of how they can be folded or incorporated into a single tribal organization?
That really is a determination that needs to be made by the tribal governing body. And we all need to keep in mind that the governing bodies are the ultimate authority on these reservations. And they're the ones that authorize these schools to convert from BIE to a grant school. And I believe you've got actually a document that allows the governing body of the Navajo Nation to determine all of the education decisions to be made by the council. I don't remember what that document is, but I think you guys have one. But it would take the action of the governing body to consolidate all of those schools into one grant if they so desire to do so. It'd just be up to the tribal council.
Okay, excellent. That's a, thank you.
Any other questions?
I just kind of wanted to update Mario. We have currently 33 grant schools that are sanctioned by the Navajo Nation that operate as a grant school, and then we have one contract school. And we have a lot of existing issues in terms of how they operate. So if I'm not sure if you're wanting examples of how they operate and so forth, but we can surely answer your questions.
Okay, yeah, thank you. No, I was from Gila River, so we have the grant schools as well. I was just curious to see how the process actually happens that's up to date. When I was at Gila River, it was done way before I came in, so I was just interested to see what the process is like as the tribe starts now, and what are some of the growing pains you're going through.
Okay. Okay, any other questions? If not, Matt, I think we're pretty much finished.
Okay. Yeah, this has been a very informative presentation. All right. One of the rules of 100-297 schools is with interest funds.
Yes.
And can a tribe, aside from federal law, develop their own regulations or policy to control or regulate the use of how schools use interest funds?
The only language in statute regarding interest that's generated investing federal funds is that these funds are to be used on behalf of the school. That's the only language that's stated in the law about use of interest funds. Now, the grantee can determine policies on investments. They can also determine what that means in terms of use on behalf of the school. The grantee makes those determinations. Now, as long as the grantee knows that there are strict limitations to how those funds can be invested and where they can be invested. And the law requires that these investments be made only in accounts that are guaranteed by the federal government, that these funds are protected, they are collateralized, and in the event of a bank failure, that these funds shall remain available to educate those students. Those are the requirements of the investments, but in terms of how the funds are used, that can be determined by the grantee, as long as it's used on behalf of the school.
Okay, question, David.
Sure.
If a school decides to use their interest funds, say like to take the whole entire school along with parent chaperones or community chaperones to a city that is about, I would say, 300 miles away, will that show up as a disallowed cost under the interest funds?
No. And here, this is something, the government really has no interest in your interest. That is not a part of the A133 audit. And you're not obligated to include interest funds as a part of the A133 audit. only program funds that are provided to the grantee. So the question of whether it's going to show up in the A133 audit, more than likely it will not.
Okay, one other question. In the past, we've had schools whose interest, a large amount of interest, is shown up in an audit report. How is that looked at in terms of the BIE?
It's really not looked at because, I mean, a school can invest their funds and you know, make money on their money, and that's the interest. But when we, as grants officers, look at those audit reports, that's really not something that's going to, you know, jump out at us in terms of whether they're allowable or disallowable. That's money that the school's made, and we really don't have anything to do with that money. That belongs to the school and or the tribe and tribal organization.
Okay. And
Now,
going to, let's say, a carryover. Now
right.
Demand a carryover.
Now, carryover is different.
Yeah. And
If,
all sitting in the bank.
right, because one of the first questions, well, let me back up. If, for example, you have, you got $1 million of ISEP money. At the end of the year, you have a $500,000 carryover. Or take Title I. If you received $500,000, and at the end of the year, you have a carryover of $300,000. The first thing that a grants officer should be looking at is the financial statement that comes with your annual report. If they're showing a large carryover, then immediately that grants officer should be talking with that grantee to find out why they are not spending their money. Because first, one of the first things that they're going to see is, or ask is, are you providing a quality education to these students? And if you are, how are you doing that, you know, with very little money? So it should be a red flag for the grants officer when they start seeing carryovers in huge amounts. And they should be addressed by the BIE. They really should be addressed and addressed quickly.
David, does the tribal organizations such as DOTI, do we have the authority to question the grant schools?
Yep.
In terms of that
That's really a determination that needs to be made by the tribal governing body. If they have delegated that authority to you, then sure, yes, you do. Now, and please keep in mind, these are tribally controlled schools. They are not school board controlled schools. So the tribal governing bodies have the authority to delegate monitoring and oversight to some other organization within their tribe. That's really up to that governing body to do that.
Okay.
So let's say the nation were to designate a single tribal organization to be the grantee. Can the nation merge existing tribal organizations into a single tribal organization? And, well, I think you've already answered that, and the answer is yes. The second part is like a more technical or legal, but in regards to their bank accounts as well as carryover, is there like any policy, rules, or process of how the merging of accounts happens, especially with the large amounts of carryover?
What?
Or does each school have a protected property interest right in the money that's in their bank?
Yeah, that becomes a little bit more sensitive, if you will. And the reason for that is those existing bank accounts, they have certain signatories that are assigned to them. And normally it's members of the school board, maybe the chief executive officer of the school. But in order to move those funds from a grant school that's already in existence to a different organization, there has to be cooperation between that new organization and the signatories of the existing grant school, because you can't touch those funds without authorization from the signatories on those bank accounts. So, I mean, it gets a little bit, you have to be, I guess, a little bit more careful in terms of how communication works between the new and the existing in order to move those funds, if you need to, because you will never control those dollars until you become signatories, or the representatives of the new organization become signatories. You can't touch that money. And I can tell you the BIE has tried in cases where grant schools were reassumed. So cannot touch those funds without authorization from the existing signatories of that grant school. But once you do that, if you get that authority, then certainly you can move those funds. Now, we all need to keep in mind that these federal dollars maintain their integrity when they go into these grants. So these funds have to be used for the purpose for which Congress appropriated these funds. Special ed for special ed, ISEP for direct instruction. Now, you also are eligible to establish consolidated budgets, right? If you have a school-wide educational program, you can establish a consolidated budget for that school or for those schools that are going to be under the grant. And there's a format that is in BIE.edu that the Bureau looks at to accept consolidated budget. So there is a process that you're going to have to go through, Matt, to make this work. To get funds going into a different bank account and how those expenditures are to be made.
Okay. Yeah, because, I mean, just a lot of the questions that have come up have always been about money and power authority. So
Yes.
This is very important. Thank you.
Yes, definitely. Okay, anything else?
What about other forms such as the SF-425s? Are those required to be submitted on a quarterly basis, or is that just for 638 schools?
That's an interesting question because right now the BIE depends on OMB Circular A102 to require the narrative or the SF-425 financial quarterly reports. Now, all of these circulars, OMB Circular A102, A87, C133, are being replaced, I think, this week by something they call a super circular, 2 CFR Part 200. If you've not seen it, I would recommend, Googling 2 CFR Part 200 because those are going to be the new requirements that are going to be imposed on tribal grants effective this month. I have not personally said whether the SF-425s are going to be required under the new regulations. I'll have to look and see. But right now, what we depend on is A102 to require grantees to submit the quarterly financial statement. Does it answer your question, Matt?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, any other questions?
Saw the timesheet mail. Did you email it on Monday?
Okay, if not, folks, that's pretty much all I have.
Okay, well, yeah, again, if you can email at the PowerPoint.
Yes, I'll have Wendy send those PowerPoints out to everybody that's on the WebEx today.
I mean, honestly, the process looks very, very simple, or it seems easy.
It is.
Navajo, the biggest hang-up or challenge is always going to be the political side.
Normally, that's what the holdups are, not only on Navajo, but at other places as well, Matt.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, David.
All righty. We'll see you folks later then.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you for your participation in today's conference call. All participants may disconnect at this time.
Just disconnect it.